The head of insurance giant AIG sat in the hot seat on Capitol Hill as lawmakers wasted no time turning up the heat yesterday. Edward Liddy tried to explain why the company, being bailed out with billions of federal dollars, distributed millions in bonuses to executives, even as the company's fortunes took a nosedive. Liddy says some executives are now voluntarily returning part or all of their bonus checks, but members of Congress weren't impressed. One likened the management of AIG to a ship's captain and crew grabbing lifeboats away from passengers for themselves. The company got an earful, but what happens now? Joining us this morning, James Gattuso with the Institute for Economic Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Good morning to you, James. And Allie Frick with the Center for American Progress. Good morning, Allie.
Good morning.
We all sat and we watched as Mr. Liddy spoke before Congress, and he was definitely on the hot seat. What did you think, Allie, of the testimony yesterday?
I think obviously a lot of us would agree that these bonuses were outrageous. I thought what was interesting about the testimony yesterday is you have a lot of the same Capitol Hill Republicans caterwauling about these bonuses who were the same people a month ago standing in the way of implementing meaningful salary caps when the Democrats and when President Obama tried to push those through during the stimulus and the TARP funds. So I do find it a little ironic that these are the same people who are saying we should never interfere in the free market workings of free enterprise, and then yesterday they are outraged over these bonuses.
James, what were your thoughts?
Well, this is hardly a free market event that is going on. The government interfered massively in the markets by giving AIG $170 billion and taking an 80% stake in this company. And this is the sort of thing that happens when the government interferes to this extent. Basically, the way I saw yesterday was more or less a national venting of anger and outrage, and justified to a large degree. The American people generally don't go into class warfare. They don't begrudge people earning a lot of money, except when that money is taken from them unjustly. And that's how the American people feel, and they're right. They feel like their pockets have been picked to pay these bonuses, which could not have been paid if it wasn't for the taxpayer money. The real hard question is, what do you do about it now? And I didn't see a lot of good answers coming out of Congress yesterday.
There have been proposals to tax those bonuses heavily, up to 90%. But in your opinion, I'll start with you, Allie, is this a dangerous slope to now start to climb? Who gets taxed those heavy fines? Who doesn't? Would you see this as a potential answer with heavily taxing the bonuses?
I'm not sure how I feel about writing specific code into the tax code that would target specific individuals, but I do think that there is recourse that government can take to try to get this money back. I do think, though, that we shouldn't be distracted by just trying to get the money back in the bonuses. The larger problem with the bonuses isn't the specific dollar amount. It is the example, the embodiment of free market capitalism run amok and values on Wall Street that are just outrageously out of step with values on Main Street.
But now that we find ourselves in this position, James, what can be done? And has AIG sort of become, the poster child for massive spending and wild misuse of that money?
I think AIG has become the poster child for massive government interference in the private sector, and we know now what happens. There are unexpected consequences and very bad consequences from that. That doesn't mean that we never bail out a company. Sometimes that's necessary, but we know now what the costs are. And the bonuses are really just a symbol of that. I don't like the idea of taxing the money because it sets a terrible precedent. It's probably unconstitutional, even if we were to get by the courts. I don't like the idea of the government targeting particular individuals and saying, we will take this money back. I don't know where that would end. But this all should be a lesson for policymakers. When you bail out a company, when you give taxpayers money to a company for whatever reason, you have to be very careful about how it's used, and perhaps more importantly, very careful in making that decision to start with, and maybe say no more often.
Let's talk about just who is to blame here. This language was written into the stimulus bill, and in fact, we've seen now the chairman of the banking committee, Senator Chris Dodd, come out and say, I was forced or asked to do this in order for the bill to go through. Who exactly should be held accountable for this? Does it stop with Edward Liddy, who was the relatively new CEO of AIG, or where should this go? Where would you like to see it go, James?
Well, I would like to find out more about what the Treasury Department knew, both under Republican administrations, in the Bush administration and the current administration. Did they know about these bonuses? Could there have been a way that they would write in some sort of provision for these? to an extent, a lot of this is a circus with officials and members of Congress, especially feigning outrage or at least feigning surprise at what happened when a lot of these people knew exactly what was going on. And this business with the provisions in the stimulus bill, I think, underscore that. There's a lot of people that knew that these existed, and they're feigning surprise now, which is typical for Washington, I'm afraid.
Allie, who's to blame for this, in your opinion?
I think it's really hard to pinpoint blame. Again, I would remind viewers that conservatives stood in the way of trying to implement salary caps, and that may have affected Senator Chris Dodd looking for compromise in that specific provision. But I think the larger issue and the larger problem, the larger person to blame here, is a culture on Wall Street that thinks that it is deserved massive salaries and massive bonuses regardless of performance, who continue to operate as if it were business as usual. And we know that the economy right now is anything but business as usual. And I hope that this is a wake-up call for the entire American community, including those on Wall Street, that we really have to come together and look for better solutions and not try to behave as if this were any other time.
We're out of time now, but I got to ask this, and this is a loaded question, but this house of cards, should AIG still be bailed out? James, what do you think about that?
Well, I think we really need to question that. No one seems to know exactly what would happen if AIG were to fail. But perhaps, and maybe going forward in the future, we should find some way to fold up corporations like this without the side damage to the economy that is feared, but still without involving hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer funds. Maybe it's some sort of accelerated bankruptcy, maybe it's some sort of prepackaged bankruptcy, but there should be a way to address this so that the people who lost money take those losses, and that's the important thing. We talk about a culture in Wall Street. I think the culture in Washington is really what needs investigating here just as much as Wall Street.
Allie?
I'd agree. I think that we need to examine closely the issue before we make any other moves. I do think it's very important that we did bail out AIG, and we saw that this week when the New York Times disclosed exactly how many billions of dollars AIG was able to then repay to cities and states throughout the country that had debts with AIG. And so I think it's much better that AIG was able to do that rather than those cities and states having to take the hit.
Allie Frick with the Center for American Progress, James Gattuso, the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
All right, Steve, back to you.
All right, Alan, thanks so much.